Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming in. I know this is a 2-hour session, but if it goes as it did on Monday, I'll end this one a little early. You'll have enough time to take a break, and then we'll come back and start the second session. Sorry we don't have snacks in here. I did not organize that. I'm sorry. Okay, so how many of you in this room have already used the ClinicalTrials.gov PRS and have registered a study before? Okay, so good handful of you. That's really good. Okay, so you will be familiar with a lot of the things I'm talking about. My name's Aliyah Lalji, by the way. I work with the School of Medicine at the ClinicalTrials.gov office here. So our office is based out of Bayview, but I've been kind of assigned to SKCC specifically. So as I said, this session we're just focusing on the registration stuff. We'll do the result stuff in the next session. If you don't already know, ClinicalTrials.gov has 2 separate sites. So there's the main site that the public sees, which is ClinicalTrials.gov, and then there's what we use, which is register.clinicaltrials.gov. And so that's where all the back-end stuff happens. Everything here is not made public until it's officially released and reviewed and then gets posted on the public site. Before we continue working with the PRS, if you don't already have your own user account, please email us and let us know so that we can create an account for you. We don't want anyone sharing accounts within the group. Even if you're just doing a favor for someone, it's just like your JET ID. We prefer that you have your own account. It doesn't take long to set it up. It's not complicated. Just send us a quick email and we'll set it up for you. Before that, anyone have questions? Okay. So now I'm going to go into like the whole federal regulations, the cut and dry stuff. Why do we need to register? It's a little confusing sometimes or complicated because different organizations, institutions have different requirements on what qualifies as a clinical trial. The final rule, which is the FDA, and FDA is the one that is issuing the fines for records that are non-compliant. So their rules for applicable clinical trials that are required to register and required to report results are these. So trials of any drugs or biologics other than phase 1 studies, trials of any devices, a trial that has 1 or more sites within the U.S., and then if it's conducted under an IND or IDE application, and then trials that involve any drugs or biologics that were manufactured here but exported outside. Any questions regarding these? Then the NIH has their criteria, and this is always changing. So it may even be updated soon, we don't know, but this is the current definition of a clinical trial for the NIH, and that's if it involves any human participants, any intervention being assigned to those participants that's studying the health-related or behavioral outcomes. The CMS, so if you have any studies that you will be claiming for Medicare, Medicaid, they also have requirements where you need to register the study. It is study-specific, so you have to look at the terms and conditions. But most of the studies already fall under the FDA and NIH criteria, so you will be registering them anyway. But this is an additional organization that requires registration. The ICMJE, how many of you are familiar with ICMJE? So that's the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors. So most of the journals that your PIs want to publish in follow the criteria set by ICMJE. And they require registration before the first patient is enrolled in the study. So all of the federal guidelines state that registration can happen within 21 days of your first enrollment. With ICMJE, they require that your study was registered before you started enrolling. So there have been cases where our PIs have submitted a manuscript and it was rejected only because they didn't register before the first patient. Even though they conformed under federal guidelines, which is within 21 days, because they weren't registered before the first patient, their manuscript got rejected. So this is something your PIs can be made aware of if they're not already, but something you can keep in mind as well when you're building up these studies and setting up all the IRB and this ClinicalTrials.gov and all of that up, is that it's recommended that you just go ahead and register before you start enrolling. Any questions regarding that? World Health Organization also wants the foundations that are under their umbrella to require registration. Results reporting is more study-specific. Actually, registration is more study-specific as well, so it's in the terms and conditions, but they are, as time goes, they are enforcing this more and more. So what happens if you don't register? So the FDA is the only one that has monetary penalties right now. So their fines for any non-compliance, not only the late results, but any non-compliance at all, is $11,569 per study per day. And that does increase with inflation. So 2 years ago it was 10,000 and something, and now it's up to here. NIH does not have monetary penalties, but they can withhold funding if you are consistently non-compliant. So they're pretty drastic fines, pretty good reason on why we should be staying compliant. And hopefully once with this program in place and once everyone gets a hang of how to use the system, it can be a lot easier to stay compliant. So this is just a recap. So the FDA requires registration within 21 days. We'll talk about the results stuff in the next session, but you can see it here. NIH also within 21 days of enrollment, and CINH about the same. And then CMS is for clinical trials. The results part is where it's study specific. And World Health Organization, ICMJE, they all want it prior to enrollment. And then the Gates Foundation. So there was a recent presentation by someone from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they actually do find that studies that do say they will register are more competitive than those that do not have any kind of plan to register or haven't specified that. So it is something that's important for your PIs to know. Any questions regarding those regulations and rules? Okay. So this is, we'll get into now how to actually register the study. So again, show of hands, how many people have registered a study before? Okay. Okay, so as you guys might know, using the system is kind of wonky, I could say. It's not the best, smoothest system in the world, but we do have to make do with what we have. So first, if you don't already have one, request your account. Then you're going to log in to the website, which is register.ClinicalTrials.gov. And on the top left here, you'll see the button that says New Record. And then we're going to go through each of the sections. So to start with, please obviously make sure all required fields are completed. You won't be able, I mean, it might let you go to the next sections if you don't complete them, but then in the end we can't submit it. So you have to make sure everything's completed. As an institutional policy, your unique protocol ID will be the J number, and the secondary IDs, your IRB numbers, all grant numbers, and any other study-specific identifiers that you have. But as an institution, we do want to make things uniform, and we're keeping the unique number, the unique ID, the J number, and then the secondary IDs, the IRB number. So these are the different sections within that protocol section, which is what you're registering the study. As I said, unique protocol ID is the J number, and then your brief title. So the brief title is something that's easy to understand. It's shorter, and it's easy for the lay public. The official title is what's from the protocol, so you can just copy-paste that from the protocol. And then the acronym, so it's optional, but don't use something that's very common that could get mixed up with something else. And then as you go along, you'll see these little flags pop up. There's an error one. There's another one that's in red, says warning. Error won't even let you go to the next section until you take care of it. The warnings will let you proceed, but they'll be flagged, and we can't clear the record with those warnings active. So you just make sure that as those pop up, you do take care of it or address it. The study status. Now, this section is very important. So at the time of registration, most of the dates that you're putting in, like the study start date, the completion date, those are all going to be anticipated. This section is the one that needs to be updated either within 30 days of making any change to the study status. So for example, if at the time of registration you were not recruiting, but now you're recruiting, you're going to go in here, change the date to, just change the start date, change it to recruiting, and it'll be an actual date versus an anticipated date. And then this section is also the section that needs to be updated at least once a year. If you have not made any changes to the study, it's going as planned, nothing in the IRB has changed, nothing in the dates have changed. This section still needs to be updated at least once a year. And what you would do is you would simply update the record verification date, and then obviously make sure everything is valid. If you need to change the completion dates, change the completion dates. But once you release it, then it'll come to me and I'll verify it through IRB and CRMS that everything is accurate. Any questions regarding this part? So this is what that page looks like. So this is the part where I said should always be the current date. And then your recruitment status, so that's where you say active, not recruiting, or if it's terminated, or so on and so forth. And then these are the dates. Now, primary completion date and study completion date. So the primary completion date is the final data point, it's the final date when the last data point for the primary outcome measure was collected. So not when that data was analyzed, but when the data was collected. For example, if the primary outcome was a PSA value, the last date that it was collected from the last patient would be the primary completion date, because you are simply looking at discrete PSA value. But if you were looking at another lab value that you had to send out to an outside lab, and you're waiting for those results because you can't report an outcome measure without those results, then it would be when you receive those results that would be the primary completion date. So, go back one slide. So in this statement, when I say final date when data for the primary outcome measure will be collected, not analyzed, this term analyzed, I'm referring to data analysis. So a lot of times people get confused. They say, we haven't finished the statistical analysis, we can't put it in. ClinicalTrials.gov does not want the statistical analysis. You can put the statistical analysis there. It's an optional field, but the actual raw data needs to be in within 1 year of the primary completion date. So when the lab analysis, that's different, right? Because the lab analysis is just what you're doing to get the numbers on paper from the blood that was drawn. But this is just talking about the data analysis. Is that clear? Okay. Any questions regarding the completion dates? Okay. So now we have the different roles. So the responsible party for our institution is always going to be the sponsor, and the sponsor is always going to be Sidney Kimmel Comprehensive Cancer Center at Johns Hopkins. So that should automatically show up there. I haven't seen it not automatically appear, but it should be there. If it isn't, you just fill it in and it'll set it up. And then your collaborators, always include them. We will verify it through the IRB, but you can get that from your IRB as well. Oh. Uh-oh. Sorry about that. Let's see, let's give it a few minutes. Or is it dead?
No, I think it's from the work that they're doing on the 10th floor, because it's done like the power went out. All right, maybe now we're good.
Did you start the recording? Catching on.
I can probably edit this part out.
Yeah. Good to go. Okay, thank you. Okay, Yeah, so just to recap, so the responsible party is always the sponsor. We are the sponsor, and then your collaborators. When you're entering them in, please include their full organization name, including and it should populate, like if it's a famous organization, then it should populate on their list. If it doesn't, you can still put it in, and then we would verify it and mark it as recognizable. Okay. Then there's the oversight section. So this is where you would put in the IND information and also IRB status. So it'll, if it's approved or if it's submitted and pending approval, you can put that in here. Okay. Yeah, so yeah, if it's approved, and it'll ask you for the approval number. So I can't tell you how many times within our records people are putting in the date next to approval number, but it should be your IRB number. It doesn't say approval date, it says approval number. I can't tell you how many times it is in our records. And then this stuff is optional, but just make sure all the required fields are there. So now we get into the study description. So the brief summary is basically a few sentences, a short paragraph on what the study is all about, hypothesis and purpose. The detailed summary is like what's written in the protocol. A lot of times you can just copy and paste it from the protocol. It's not a required field, so you don't have to have something there, but if you prefer, then you can put it in there. When you do put it in, though, please make sure to remove all parenthetical citations. So all those ones and all the references in the brackets, you can take those out. If you do want to have references there, you would insert them in the references section, which is at the end of the whole application, but it's not required. And then you don't need to include the eligibility criteria or anything in this section because there's a separate section for that. So this is just, the little introduction on the beginning of the protocol. Well, maybe not little, but that introduction at the beginning of the protocol. So then there's some formatting things to watch out for. So you can't use words like I, we, our, us. It should be phrases like the investigator, the study team, and then the participants. They prefer the word participants instead of patient. So wherever you can, use participants instead of patient. But again, it's not something that will stop anything from going further, but it is something that they prefer. And then make sure to expand all acronyms and correct all your spelling and grammar errors. There is a spell check feature. So when you go to the record summary page, which is the main page when you open the record, on the top left, there's a little button that says spelling. When you click on that, it will do a spell check across the record and tell you in each section where the spelling error is. It doesn't check for grammar, but it checks for spelling. And it'll also tell you if there's acronyms that maybe should be expanded. So at least then you can manually go into each section and then fix that. Any questions about this? So now you have to specify what conditions and what the keywords, search keywords will be. So this is how, when people are searching in ClinicalTrials.gov for your study, these are things that they would type in to find your study. So conditions are always specific medical conditions that are there. What I suggest is if you're, for example, looking at hepatocellular carcinoma. Hepatocellular carcinoma is a common term. It's used, it will be there. You can search it. But if you're looking at a specific type of hepatocellular carcinoma, for example, something that's not researched often, and it's like, I think there's one specificity, which is microsatellite instability. That's not something that's going to easily be searchable. So what I would do is I would put in hepatocellular carcinoma, and then add a second one that says hepatocellular carcinoma, like the specific one, microsatellite instability, high or low, whatever it is. In this way, whoever is searching, because this could be anyone from the public searching, or it could be people who are familiar with the condition. But in any case, they would search hepatocellular carcinoma because that's a common term, and everything, all the studies that are pertinent to that will show up. So think about that when you're coming up with these terms to add in this section. Keywords are any words or phrases to describe the study. So in most cases, they are also medical terms. You don't need to put things like the PI's name or the institution under keywords because those are already populated from the rest of the record. But you would put things like if it's for women, if it's for children, if it's breast cancer, whatever it is, you could put that here. So now the study design. I know this is kind of heavy, but I'll show you a screenshot in more detail. But this is all directly from your protocol. So your study type, it's automatically going to be populated from the first page when you started this record, if it's interventional or observational, so on and so forth. If whatever's here you see is wrong, or you've realized, oh, I put in interventional, but it's not actually interventional, that's okay. You can continue with the rest of it, and when you get to the end, you can edit it. You won't be able to edit it from this screen, but at the end, it's an easier way. You can just click edit and then change it. This is all pretty straightforward, so the purpose, the study phase, the model, if it's a parallel or sequential, the number of arms. So even if it's only a single arm study, you still have to specify one arm. And then you'll have to name that arm and the arm description. But even if it's still a single arm study, please specify it. And then if you're randomizing, you can put that here. Enrollment. So at this stage when you're registering, this doesn't really matter, but enrollment is, at this part, it's going to be the number of people that you plan to consent. When it comes time to your results reporting, just so you know this in the back of your mind, enrollment is the number of people who signed consent, whereas participants started is the number of people who are assigned to an intervention. So I know sometimes we use enrolled as the people who started the study, but for ClinicalTrials.gov purposes, enrolled is the people who signed the consent form. This is before all the screen failures and withdrawals and things like that. And then the number of participants started are the people who are actually on the study. Any questions regarding that? So this is what it looks like. You know, obviously make sure that the right sections are completed. This stuff isn't, the descriptions aren't required, but if there's something specific to your study that you think is going to make things clearer later, put it in. It doesn't hurt to have something there. So now we get into the arms and interventions. If you set this up correctly from now, it's going to make results entry so much easier when the time comes. So if this is, you'll see if some of you are working on older records, this wasn't always set up correctly, and even though it was approved, it doesn't get approved now. So if this was set up correctly, then putting in the results would be a lot easier. So you always want to have a specific arm title. Don't call it Arm 1, Arm 2. Try and make it more specific so you know who is in that arm. And for example, here it says Cohort A, durvalumab, and single-use teriflunomab, I think it is. And then your arm type, so you know if it's experimental, if it's an active comparator, if it's the placebo control, you'll be able to choose that here. And then the description. So this can be pretty detailed. It's going to be exactly what's going to happen to this group and who is in this group. If you put the intervention description here, which is completely fine, you don't need to be as detailed when it comes time to actually entering the intervention. So here, this is where you would put, like, if they're receiving it every 2 weeks, every cycle, things like that, or if it's going to be, or if they're going to receive a series of interventions and what they will be. So this is where you would detail that. Now, for the intervention section, you're going to have to specify each thing. So the type of intervention, the name of the intervention, it's required to use generic. Go ahead.
Just to step back a bit, for the form description, that could be protocol specific.
Yes. Yeah, so all of this would be protocol specific. But yeah, so you can take this from the protocol. That's perfectly fine. Just make sure like patients is changed to participants, things like that. But yeah, you can take that from the protocol. And then even the interventions you can take from the protocol. It's just you'll have to put them in the right sections, but you can still take that from the protocol as well. Yeah, so for the intervention name, if it's a drug, they prefer to use generic names, so please use generics. And then your other names would be the brand names, or if there's any industry-specific names that are there. For example, you know, if you had ibuprofen as the intervention, then the other names would be Advil and Motrin, things like that. Then the intervention description. So think of it this way. The arm description is where you're specifically saying every cycle or how many cycles, how often they're receiving it. The intervention is kind of like what you see on a prescription. So it'll have the route of administration, it'll have the dose, but you don't have to go into full detail if you've already written it in the arm description. If you don't have it in the arm description, then of course you do need the details in here, but it makes more sense to have everything in the arms and then put in here just the individual intervention. And of course you can have as many interventions as applicable. So this is what it looks like, and you can see here the intervention description. They were pretty detailed, and they specified that if there was this condition that they'll receive more. And they have the other name here. This is the generic name. And you can see here, because they had 2 different doses of the same drug, they're separate interventions. So if it's a different dose, they have to be separate interventions. It can't just be one intervention, and then you say the different doses here, because each arm is receiving the different dose. Is that clear? Any questions?
I think I do have one. If it's just a one-arm study,
yes,
but there are multiple doses, I mean, if a person needs to be dose reduced or whatever, would it be separate interventions, or that's just one?
So are they all receiving these multiple doses? Like, is it a dose escalation?
No.
Or?
So, like, we use palbociclib for some of our studies. They come in 3 separate doses. If it's just a one-arm study and person A gets, 125, but another person can take 125, they take 100. Would those be classified as different interventions?
So it depends. If it's planned that 5 patients in this arm will get 100, 5 patients will get 125, then they would be separate arms. If it's because they initially got 125, they all got 125, but the person didn't tolerate it, so now you had to reduce the dose, then no, you would just be the 125 that goes there. Okay. Okay. So then there's a third section. So you've already specified the arms, you've specified the interventions. Now you have to assign which interventions go to which arm. So this is like the cross-reference table. And you can see we have all 3 of the interventions that we specified. There are 2 arms. And here we're showing which arm is receiving which intervention. This is very important. Sometimes people check off everything, and it's like, then what, both the arms are the same, but they're not. So you have to specify which arm is receiving what. Any questions about this? Okay. Now the outcome measures. So this is a very difficult section for some people, and this section is the one that always comes back with comments when you submit it to ClinicalTrials.gov. The outcome measures is where you're actually reporting the results. So because you're registering the study, it's very important that just like the arms and interventions, that this is set up correctly from now. For those of you who are entering results on records that were established years ago, you'll notice that it's coming back with comments, or I'm emailing you saying that this isn't the right way to word it, you need to change it to this. And it's because before everything was being approved as is, and now they have very rigid guidelines on how they want things phrased and how they want things entered. So we have to make sure to kind of conform to their guidelines. This is just a very basic example. Your title is going to be what is being measured. So, for example, if you just say safety, it's not going to be acceptable. If you say safety and toxicity, it's not going to be accepted. You can only assess one variable for each outcome measure. So if you were assessing safety and toxicity, safety would be one, toxicity would be another. But if you're assessing safety based on toxicity, then that's just one outcome. You're just assessing safety based on the number of adverse events or whatever the case may be. So in this case, it's safety as assessed by number of participants experiencing serious adverse events. That's good to go. Your description. How are you quantifying this outcome? So So here you've said what you are quantifying. What are you measuring? And here you're going to say how you're measuring that. This doesn't mean a lab technique or anything technical. It just means how are you counting what you're measuring. So in this case, we're talking about the number of participants that had serious adverse events being grade 3 or higher as per CTCAE, and you have to specify which one. You can't just say incidence of serious adverse events. It doesn't work. So it has to be very specific. When you're entering results, you'll know that you have to specify the unit of measure, what number is going in. So that's why you need to specify that here. You need to include the unit of measure. You need to include any scales. So if you were reporting a pain score and you were using the VAS scale, the visual analog scale, you have to say pain as assessed by the visual analog scale, which ranges from, and you have to specify the range, so 0 to 10, 0 being no pain at all, 10 being the most severe pain, and then that would be okay. So it needs to be very specific, and you need to explain that criteria. The time frame. So this is when this outcome measure is being measured. So you can't say things like at the start of the study or at the time of intervention. It has to be very specific, day 1 or day 1 post-intervention. You can have negative days, so like day 0, day -1, day -2, if that's the case. But, and then if you're assessing a change from point A to point B, then you have to specify that as well. If you're assessing something at day 30 and day 60, day 90, they have to be separate outcomes as well. So it does become kind of lengthy, but it is how they require it. Any questions? I know it's a lot to take in, but is there another slide in your printout after this one regarding the outcome measures? Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So the eligibility is the next section. And here is where you put in the eligibility criteria that you left out of it from the detailed description section. They prefer a bulleted format for the eligibility criteria, not 1 or A, B, C. So to do that, they have it as space dash space. They already put 1 in there for you, so you can copy and paste, but just so you know, it's space dash space. And then it'll look like a bullet after that. Please make sure this all matches your protocol. They have started verifying that by looking at the actual protocol document. We do it as well internally, but just to save time. If you're setting it up the first time, let's look at it right. Contacts and locations. It's very important that you do put valid information here. This is made public, so please make sure that that this is correct information. Your contacts, as an institutional policy, we do require a central contact person. That can be anyone on the study that the public would contact for information regarding the study. So normally the coordinator or research nurse or someone will go on the spot. You could have the PI if they wanted to be there, but it's up to you. And then the study official. So you need to specify the study official. So the PI, the chair, whoever is going to be on the study. In most cases, it's the PI that's listed. And locations. All locations should be specified. So even if it's like Hopkins Hospital and Bayview, both of them should be there, Sibley, Suburban, they should all be on there, not just one of them. And we will verify this through CRMS, but you please make sure, I can't tell you how many times we only have one site listed. And it's bad for us because when people in the public are looking at the study, you want them to know all the sites that are there. And you'll be able to specify in here which sites are recruiting or not recruiting, because some of them are pending IRB approval, and that's fine. That doesn't mean you can't list them. You just say that they're not recruiting or if it's pending or whatever. Any questions? So then we have the, and this is just, kind of expanding it. So again, make sure all the information is valid. Then the last section is the references. So you're not required to provide any references, but if you do have references, for example, as I said in the protocol, if you had put anything in the detailed description that you need to specify the reference, this is where you would enter it in. It'll ask you for all the information, like, you know, the author and the title, and if you have the PubMed ID, then that would be sufficient, and you can put that in and it'll populate all of that automatically. If you do put any website links on there, please make sure that they work. If they don't work, a warning will pop up and we can't clear the record unless they work. So if that happens, then we end up just removing it. So please make sure that it's the correct link. Okay, so now you've gone through all the sections. You've double-checked everything. Please make sure that all of these errors, warnings, notes, they're all addressed. Errors, 100% need to be addressed. Warnings, 100% need to be addressed. We cannot clear the record if those are not addressed. Notes are more advisory.
The professor said you can't go beyond an error.
Right, you can't go beyond an error.
You have to address it anyway.
Yes, sometimes what happens is maybe you went through all the sections as you were working and there were no errors that popped up, but because you entered something in like one of the last sections, now there's an error somewhere in the beginning. So you might not have seen it when you were going through, but now that you've got to the end, you'll see that there's something there. So just make sure that it's addressed. Make sure the warnings are addressed. And notes, as I said, are advisory. If you think they're applicable, then listen to them. If they don't seem applicable or you don't know how to answer it, you can leave that out. It won't stop anything from proceeding. And then, as I said, there's a spell check feature. Always double check that. Make sure that there are no grammar errors, so please read everything. I know it takes a lot of time, but please double check that. And you'll see there's like, I'll show you after this, but everything will be, that's checked in green is good to go. So if there's warnings and not decided, then obviously address those. Access list members. So the person who created this record automatically becomes the record owner. If you're doing this as a favor to a coworker and you're not supposed to be the record owner, then simply shoot me an email and say that so-and-so should be the record owner for this record, and I will change them to the record owner and keep you on the access list. So if you're doing this in the group, if it's just a busy time and you're just helping each other out, then that's fine. We can always change the record owner. Access list, just like how you have study team members on the IRB, anyone in your group who you think would require access to this record, or someone that you rely on if you're away or if you're sick or if you're on vacation, and someone who's going to take over your responsibilities that needs to have access to this, if the case came up where something needed to be addressed, then add them to the access list. The more people, the better, because when we have an issue with any of the records and we need to communicate to your group, if it's only one person and those messages are not getting through, then we're just hitting a dead wall. So it's better if we have more people on the access list. Of course, we don't want the world on it, but you know what I mean, like just within your group. With the School of Medicine, the PI is always the record owner, and the access list is usually the coordinator, research assistants. I know things work differently here. So here we have either the coordinator or the manager or the nurse that's a record owner, and then the access list is anyone else in the group. So however way your own group is structured, put it in that way. The record owner will always receive the automatic notifications from the ClinicalTrials.gov PRS. So there's an email that goes out every 6 months that tells you you need to update your record. That will go to the record owner. Any messages, if once you submit your record, if it comes back with comments, that automatic notification goes to the record owner. So the record owner has to be someone that's actively working on the study. And then, so any questions about the access list and the record owners? Okay. So once you've finished all of that, you made sure everything's correct, you double-checked everything, you're going to mark it complete. Everything should look like this, not like this. I've had people submit the record like this, and then we say, well, look, but yeah, so please do it like this. What happens, so before what used to happen is you would mark it complete and it automatically goes to ClinicalTrials.gov. You can't do anything about it. They will review it and then come back to you with comments. Now what happens is it comes to me. I review the record. I will make sure that everything that should be covered is covered. If I find that there's any issues, or if I think that the reviewers are probably going to pick up on this, or they might flag this, then I'll email you. I usually do email first and then follow up with a call if necessary, but I'll email you and I'll tell you if there's any issues that need to be addressed. Usually, I try and do this within 1 or 2 days of you marking it complete, so not too much time goes by. After we've done that, so after I've made sure that it's okay, or I've communicated with you and we've cleared up any issues that were outstanding, then it gets released to ClinicalTrials.gov. So that's the ClinicalTrials.gov PRS review. Their reviewers for registrations, they take up to 2 to 7 days. Sometimes when they're busier, it takes a little bit longer, but I don't think up to now we've seen it go over a week. So that's just for you to be aware and keep in your head when you're looking at recruitment and enrollment. After they finish their review, if they do have any comments that they did pick up on that I might have missed in the beginning, some, different eyes, different set of opinions, but if they find something and they reply with comments, and you'll see, like, they'll say major issue or advisory issue. An advisory issue you're not obligated to respond to. If they give you suggestions on how they want things phrased, things like that. If you think that it's not applicable, you're not obligated to reply to it. Major issues, it's a big red box that says major issues, and they'll say, like, if there was something wrong. Even typos are flagged as major issues. So those have to be responded to within 15 calendar days, not business days, calendar days. So Saturday, Sunday is included. Normally what happens is the record owner will receive a notification from the PRS reviewers that your record cannot be updated because of comments. So then you would go into the system and look at what those comments are. I will also, if I see that, because I can tell from the system if you've opened it up or not. So I'll usually give you guys a day or two to look at it. If I see that no one has looked at it, then I'll just send you a reminder email, hey, this record came back with comments. I've addressed what I could, but this one I'm confused about. Do you know what the answer is? So I will try and address whatever I can on my own. If there's something that's very study specific that I can't pick up on, then I will contact you and we can clear it from there. After we submit that, it again will take up to 2 to 7 business days for them to review and approve it. If it's something simple, they usually get it done within a day or two. But sometimes if it was something more complicated, then it takes a little longer. So then it'll be published and it'll be made public. It will look as it does. And then at that point, that's when you have to make sure you verify your record once a year, and that's that study status section. You update your record within 30 days of any changes to the study status. So if you've changed from not recruiting to recruiting or recruiting to not recruiting, those things have to be updated within 30 days. And then your results entry will be within 1 year of the primary completion date. Any questions? Okay. So that's all. If you guys do need help as the process goes along, there's 4 of us in the office. I'm the one who's dedicated to SKCC, but our group email, which is registerclinicaltrials@jhmi.edu, we all get that email. If I'm away or something, one of these guys, Dr. Oswald Tete and Dr. Prince Nuama, they will always fill in for me, and they can communicate with you as well. This is Anthony Keys. He's our director, but we are mostly taking care of the ClinicalTrials.gov records. You can also